Welcome to Hill Update. I'm your host, Dean Allison, Member of Parliament for Niagara West. I've never done what I'm going to do on the show today, and probably never will again, but I feel it's critically important to do it. I'm going to read a message I received this week in its entirety from somebody who I know to be a proud Canadian, a family person, an exceptionally educated person with a stellar resume and commendable credentials. This person also happens to work in the federal bureaucracy. They've requested I not share their name because of the fear of reprisal from the government and attacks on their reputation. So with that, let me begin reading the message. As you may have heard, there is a large convoy of trucks headed to Ottawa for this Saturday. Much of the media and the federal government have been trying to slander them as anti-vaxxers, inconsequential, fringe, and dangerous. But you can bet they will try and focus attention on any radicals or fringe participants that show up to accomplish just this. They are deceitfully trying to frame the truckers as strictly being against the vaccine mandate and targeting them. The Freedom Convoy was triggered by the latest government overreach, yes? But this protest and movement is not just against all mandates and all restrictions. It's a national condemnation against undemocratic, unaccountable, and non-transparent and cynical attitude of the federal government. It's also a clarion call to Canada's opposition parties to perform their constitutional obligation and hold the government to account. The never-ending restrictions have been subject to next to no debate or scrutiny by Parliament. These restrictions have been implemented without oversight or expiration dates. The government has articulated no endgame or what success looks like. Across the globe, many countries have already begun repealing most of the restrictions. UK, Spain, Ireland, Czech Republic, even Israel, who championed vaccines as a silver bullet and restrictions, is now openly debating whether to scrap their vaccine mandate. The pandemic has evolved. It is January 2022, not March 2020. The vaccines were a critical tool to get us to this point, but they have fallen short of expectations. This fact has been accepted by all major health authorities, including the WHO, Health Canada, and the CDC. And while the rest of the world is coming to terms with what the pandemic and science looks like today, and transitioning to a more diverse and appropriate strategies, our federal government continues to double down on a strategy that is no longer relevant. A strategy that has quickly become punitive and in bad faith. As our global competitors are opening up, our federal government is fixated on keeping us locked down and in fear. Canada has struggled to compete globally for decades, and now we have also to deal with having 10 to 20% of our workforce prohibited from being able to work. The Liberal Party sold itself to Canadians as being inclusive and committed to bringing our country together. Instead, we've endured one of the most divisive federal governments and prime ministers in all of Canada's history. The federal government has scapegoated the unvaccinated and endangered in reckless and dangerous divisive rhetoric and fear-mongering. As you know, I fled to Canada from the former Yugoslavia. I know what a failed state looks like and what the steps are to get there. And it always starts with the purification of people into groups, us versus them, clean and unclean, vaccinated and unvaccinated. The erosion of our institutions, the unilateral use of and abuse of power, the refusal to return emergency powers as the emergency passes, the inability or unwillingness of opposition parties and courts to uphold the Constitution and civil liberties out of the fear of doing or saying anything that is unpopular. The problem and threat is not that it is done cynically today to get a few extra votes. The real danger is that it is negligently acclimatized a society towards accepting and permitting violations of human rights, suspension of civil liberties, and the abuse of power. There is no need for a mass conspiracy in order to end up in an authoritarian hell. We can end up there just the same through sheer incompetence. That is the path this government has set us on. To conclude, this is not about being pro or anti-vax or even being anti-mandate per se. It is about putting pressure on our governments and opposition parties alike and demanding that they conduct themselves with the dignity and the gravity that our Constitution demands, that they govern themselves accordingly to the evolving reality and science, not public opinion polls. We may all have different views on how the pandemic should have been managed, but I think we can all agree that the manner this government has conducted itself has been unacceptable and un-Canadian. There's nothing preordained about liberty and democracy. It does not just happen, and there is no guarantee it will last forever. The tragic trend of human history is one of oppression and authoritarianism. It is our civic responsibility and obligation to the next generation to do what we can to safeguard our democracy and better our communities and country, encourage debate, share articles, question those in authority, peacefully attend a protest, support those more courageous than ourselves to stand up with what we think is wrong. Welcome back to the Hill Update. Joining me on the show today is Member of Parliament for Oshawa, Colin Carrie. Colin Carrie was elected in 2004, and he has been the Parliamentary Secretary for Industry, for the Environment, and Parliamentary Secretary for Health. Colin, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Dean.
Just before we get started, let's talk a little bit about Oshawa and the riding. I mean, traditionally, it hasn't really been conservative until you came along a number of years ago. I mean, it's been NDP, it's a working class neighborhood. Like, just talk to us about a bit about what your riding is like and some of the issues you have there.
Well, Oshawa, Dean, has always been a working class neighborhood, of course, General Motors, and you have a connection down in your community. So you understand the importance of working together, supply chains, things like that. We're also a very diverse community. Oshawa has one of the longest lasting multicultural events called Fiesta Week. So we've had people come to Oshawa to build our community from Ukraine, Poland, Italy, Portugal, all over the world have come to Oshawa to make our community one of the best communities in I think, the entire country. So I'm seeing a lot of things similar, I think, that you would be seeing right now. You mentioned in your opening dialogue, fear and division. Sadly, I'm getting more and more emails from people who are actually starting to become afraid of our own government. We're seeing mental health issues, opioid issues. We're seeing affordable housing for young people. I don't know how many emails I've gotten, Dean, from young people who are losing hope to be able to ever afford a home, seniors on fixed incomes who are worried about just inflation. I think Canadians are starting to understand that printing money the last couple of years, 25% more money in circulation, is starting to have an effect. And now more worry than ever before because of the the truckers, the worry about supply chain. People are starting to be very, very concerned about the direction of the country.
You know, one of the things I mentioned in my opening monologue is that there's a number of countries that are actually reversing this. Norway, I understand, Sweden, the UK, that are actually reversing these mandates. I mean, what are you seeing on the global stage as well?
Exactly what you're seeing. The United Kingdom, Israel, Denmark. We're seeing states in the United States opening up. I'm getting communications from friends who are in Florida, for example, that are wondering what is wrong with Canada. So I'm really, really getting concerned that we're going to be behind the 8 ball here. Canada is a country that has benefited from world trade. So we need to get back on track. We need to start understanding that, yes, COVID has been a serious, serious pandemic, and it's starting to become endemic. But sadly, we're not seeing a plan from this government to emerge. And I think, Dean, our economy is going to suffer even further if our country is going in one direction and the world is going in the other direction.
You've also spent some time as on the Canada-U.S. committee in terms of our relationship. And so let's talk about our relationship with our U.S. Partners across the way.
Well, I think, Dean, there are some red flags going up where we're seeing a culmination of policy, a similar policy that's being implemented right now with the Biden administration, the rhetoric, the Build Back Better. We're seeing policies that are punishing towards Canada. I don't have to tell your viewers about the Keystone XL pipeline, how the Biden administration actually canceled that, one of the first things that they did. And now the United States, sadly, is relying on Russia for importing oil and gas instead of clean, ethical products coming from Canada. I could go down the list, being softwood lumber. We've seen challenges in the auto sector right now, supply chains. There's a rising protectionism in the United States that this government is starting to fall way behind in addressing these important issues that will help Canada come out of this recession that we have to get out of sooner than later for the good health of our country.
Got about 30 seconds left, Colin. I know that we've been left off of a number of security briefings worldwide as we look and move through some of the international challenges. Just quickly in 30 seconds, what does that say for our relationship internationally?
It's a sad situation because Canada has always been seen as a mid-power, a fair broker. So to have world leaders meeting together, Australia, Britain, France, the United States, and Canada not being even invited to the table to help solve some of these world problems, it's unprecedented. We've never had such a low reputation in the international community.
Welcome back to the Hill Update. I'm Dean Allison. Joining me on the show today is Colin Carrie, Member of Parliament for Oshawa. Colin, I know that one of the things we hear as MPs is we get a lot of feedback into our offices. Talk to me a little bit about all the feedback you've been getting about some of this divisiveness. I know you recently wrote a letter to the RCMP based on feedback you were getting from your constituents. So would just tell us some of the things you're hearing from your constituents.
Well, Dean, again, it's unprecedented. During a time of crisis, you would think that a leader of a country, Prime Minister Trudeau, would actually be trying to unite Canadians, to support Canadians. Instead, I've been getting emails, phone calls about people who are incredibly upset about the direction of the country, hate speech. I don't think I have to tell your viewers, the Prime Minister's video that was recently re-released during the campaign, he decided to politicize health issues, the vaccinated versus unvaccinated, for example. So I did recently write a letter to the RCMP commissioner asking her to open an investigation against the Prime Minister. He was on this show, and the language being used, Dean, was incredible to come from the mouth of a Prime Minister who, in my viewpoint, has lost the moral authority to actually be a prime minister when he says on national TV that people who are unvaccinated are misogynist, are racist, and they don't believe in science. And the question is, should we tolerate these people? And like you, and the letter that you read at the top of the show, in Oshawa, I have many constituents who have come from Poland, Germany, Ukraine, Russia, China, from authoritative regimes, and they're begging me to do something about this because they've seen this playbook before, where governments around the world, authoritative governments, have used the divide and conquer methods, instilling fear, hatred, and division against a minority group. And most of them, by the way, are fully vaccinated, double vaxxed, triple vaxxed, who are saying to me, this has to stop. Colin, please do something about it. So I've taken the unprecedented step of writing the RCMP commissioner and asking her to open an investigation against our own Prime Minister under Section 319 of the Criminal Code to see if we can actually do something to make this man stop his hatred. So hatred hurts.
So my question, I know you posted on social, on Twitter and Facebook, is what has the response been like? I mean, are some people thinking this, this is overreach? Like, I mean, this seems kind of harsh. I mean, are you getting support? Where does the public opinion lie on the response you've been getting after you indicated what you've done?
Unprecedented again, Dean. I've never had a response like this before. It's been over 200,000 views on social media about people who are very supportive of the action. It's Canadians do not like this. Canadians know that we are a compassionate society, we are a tolerant society, and have the Prime Minister say, should we tolerate these people? Should we tolerate these people, calling them misogynist, racist? Dean, I don't know any other member of Parliament who has been actually accused of groping, for example, a female reporter who's been caught in blackface 4 times. And he has the gall to call people who have made a personal health decision, many of them for very good reasons, misogynist and racist. It's unconscionable.
So you've got over 200,000 views. Did I notice it was picked up by a number of papers as well? and shared that way?
Yes, I think there is a lot of criticism of censorship in this country, but it gets to a point, Dean, where even journalists that typically may not be interested in these civil liberties and human rights stories, especially right now during this pandemic, they're offended as well. And they're doing their job to get that message out. And now, as the House of Commons is coming back next week, my intention is to bring these issues even more forward. And I'm hoping my colleagues in the House will start to stand up for these issues, because it's unconscionable that we have a leader of a country that would isolate, scapegoat, demonize a small section of his population in such a way.
You lead into it's nice. We come back from break. The House of Commons is going back next week. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things you see that are going to be possibly on the agenda, some of the things that the opposition parties will be pushing, what maybe the Liberal agenda will be when we get back, when we come back from break. Back to the Hill Update. Joining me on the show is Colin Carrie, member of Parliament for Oshawa this week. Colin, last segment here. There's a number of things going on this week. We got a truck convoy that's heading to Ottawa. We've got the opening of Parliament. And then I want to finish off the segment. We're just talking about things we can do better, I think, as a country. But let's talk about any thoughts as we roll into next week and we roll into the opening of Parliament. Any thoughts on the truck convoy as we... So where are you going when we head back next week to Parliament?
Well, I think, Dean, we do have to acknowledge the important work that these truckers are doing for Canadians. These are the individuals throughout the pandemic who have kept Canadians alive. They have delivered food to our grocery stores. They have delivered products. Everything that is in your house has been delivered by a trucker. So when these truckers are driving all the way from Vancouver to Ottawa, spending thousands of their own dollars to meet with politicians to say, listen, there's something wrong here. I think it's inherent that we give them the courtesy of listening to their concerns. What is disturbing to me, again, is further hate and division through the government propaganda machine that is demonizing these truckers. These truckers are hurting. These truckers have lost their jobs. These truckers, who have been called heroes by the Prime Minister, are now being scapegoated and demonized. So I know myself, I will be meeting with some of the truckers and organizers of the protest and listening to their concerns. It's the least that we can do as a elected representative, and I hope the Prime Minister gets on board and listens to them as well. But it kind of leads into the other issues that we're dealing with. And in Oshawa, it's so important, our supply chains. We've heard from the auto parts sector, the grocery sector, how important it is to keep these lines open. And I think that's going to be a big priority, as well as just inflation. We've got to get back to it. We've got to push the government to come up with a reopening plan, because we have not seen a plan yet from this government. And it's important for our country to get back on track.
What are some of the things you think we're going to see from opposition parties as we open Parliament again in terms of subjects and areas of discussion?
I think, Dean, it's going to be very important to actually take a summary of the pandemic response. So we find ourselves here, like you said, this is not 2020, this is 2022. If governments are saying we're in an emergency for 2 years, if we're still in an emergency after 2 years, the government doesn't want us to get out of it. This is ridiculous. We need to come forward with a more strategic plan, because this pandemic has caused suffering and pain in the Canadian economy and with our individuals. We have to start looking at the mental health challenges that Canadians are left over, our young people. As I said, hope, getting them back so that they can have an education to build up our country. I believe our country is the best country in the world. We have the greatest opportunities, but our government is holding us back. They're being restrictive. They're using fear and pain to move their agenda forward instead of bringing people together.
So we've got about a minute left. So what are some of the things we can encourage others to do as we move forward? I mean, certainly, encouraging one another as we saw in the overpass. Any thoughts in terms of what we can do in a positive way?
Yes, I'm telling my constituents to, instead of hate, because hate hurts, reach out with love and understanding of people in our community. And I'm not just talking about things to do with the pandemic, Dean. My office is right across the street from the Backdoor Mission in Oshawa, where we have now record numbers of homeless people that are out in freezing temperatures. We need to start to listen and understand the concerns of our neighbors and our friends and reach out to people who have been locked up for literally 2 years. They've been isolated. We have to ease them back into normal society and let them know that this is not normal. This is not the new normal. We have the potential to be the greatest country in the world, and we need to let Canadians understand that they have the power. It's not Justin Trudeau that has given you the inalienable rights that you have. Those are your rights. He's taken them away from you. Now we have to make sure we get them back.
Colin, thank you very much for joining us. And I think that's good advice as we close off today, that we need to love, we need to give back, and we need to reach out to our fellow man. Thank you very much for joining us today on the show.
Thanks for doing this, Dean.